This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
On the under $3 menu at McDonald's, a McChicken is $2. Because when you're craving a McChicken, you deserve a McChicken. And now that McChicken is just $2 with McValue.
Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher for delivery.
Rise up! Team Rise! Rise up! Team Rise!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL Wire site, covering, of course, Arizona Cardinals. And we are in the time of year where we have our opponent preview series. And so over the next several shows, we will have an episode of what is hopefully each of the Cardinals' 14 opponents, someone covering, writing the team. And in this episode, it will be about the Cardinals' Week 5 opponent at home. At State Farm Stadium. It's the Detroit Lions. This is a new face to the show as we have a new lead writer since last year. Over the last couple of years, over at Lions Wire, I've got Josh Helmer. Josh, welcome to the show. First time having you on. I know you're fairly new to and at least to Lions Wire. What is your background with the NFL Wire? How'd you join us?
Well, first off, Jess, just let me say thank you for the invitation, and it's great to meet you, my friend. So I've been with the College Wires for a couple of years now. I think this is going on year 5 that I've run Iowa's website, Hawkeyes Wire, and at any rate, had dabbled in a little bit of NFL work with the 49ers and Dolphins and with Levi over at Raiders Wire in bits and pieces, and wanted, of course, an opportunity to, get to be a lead writer twice, not just with Iowa, but with the Detroit Lions too. So opportunity presented itself, and I'm fired up about it.
That's fun. I mean, you must be writing a ton every day. I've been running Cards Wire for 10 years now. I just hit this month. It's 10 years since I started with the Wire, and well, at least over here, I do probably 95% of the content on the site, plus the podcast and stuff like that. But welcome to the NFL side of things, and I'm glad to have you on as we want to talk about the Detroit Lions. The Cardinals and the Lions are on two very different trajectories, although interestingly enough, they play each other as part of their last place schedules. They were both last place teams a season ago. However, the Lions' last place season is a far different story than the Cardinals' last place season, as Detroit played in a very competitive NFC North, and they finished 9-8. They finished 9-8 on the season. And so tell us about last season. What happened last year? What obviously coming off that division, the season before, winning the division, playing so well. What went well and what didn't go well for the Lions in 2025?
Well, injuries have continued to be a problem for Detroit, and in particularly defensively, which, of course, I'm sure we'll spend some time on that over the course of this hangout session, Jess. But the injuries defensively, and that has some impact, of course, on well, what is this 26 season going to look like for Detroit? Thinking really about Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, those two stars, a couple of them defensively, safeties in the defensive backfield. So you start there, and it wasn't just those two. I mean, it's up and down the Lions defense where they had a ton of man games lost. So the injury front, but then also you look at the two coordinators. Remember, Ben Johnson left. He became the Chicago Bears head coach, and he had been the Lions' very successful offensive coordinator. You had Aaron Glenn, who was the defensive coordinator in Detroit. And, of course, he left to become the New York Jets head coach. So that was kind of the story going into last season, is how is Detroit going to replace these two great coordinators that have gone on and now become NFL head coaches in Chicago and in New York? And the answer was a little bit of a mixed bag, really, on both fronts. Of course, defensively with Kelvin Shepard, who was promoted in-house with the Lions. He's kind of got, Jess, what you would look at and say, okay, reason that it maybe didn't play out the way everybody would have hoped. All of the injuries on that side of the football, which we've discussed. And offensively, you look at some of the numbers from last season, Jess, and Jared Goff, again, right up there among the NFL's passing yardage leaders. There's a lot of statistics you would look at. Scoring offense, way up there in terms of the NFL ranks last season. But it was the inability to deliver in key spots on key third downs. The run game, the offensive line took a step back last season for Detroit. And, of course, Frank Ragnow, his story last offseason, the retirement over the course of the summer, that was unexpected, threw a wrench into last season for the Lions. And all of that wound up adding up to a fourth consecutive winning season, which hasn't been done in a long time for Lions fans, but it was a disappointing 9-8 winning season where they missed the playoffs. So a lot of factors that played into it, but those some of the chief factors among them.
Well, I mean, offensively, they looked great. And even interestingly enough is that they did make a change. And we'll talk about it in the next segment. But, you've got our old offensive coordinator who was kind of the scapegoat of our season last year. Goff played if you look at the numbers, Jared Goff, fantastic season, 34 touchdown passes, 8 interceptions, over 4,500 passing yards. Jahmyr Gibbs rushed for over 1,200 yards. You had Amon-Ra St. Brown at over 1,400 yards. J-Mo at over 1,100 yards. The offense performed extremely well individually and as a volume. And then you get on the defensive side of the ball, you've got Aiden Hutchinson, you've got Jack Campbell. Was it the injuries, or was it more just coming together in the new system?
I think probably, like many NFL discussions or football discussions we can have, probably a combination. Obviously, it was Kelvin Shepard's first year, again, as the defensive coordinator, and I'm sure there was some on-the-job learning for Coach Shepard last season. It's different being the man to call the defense. Everything is at your fingertips. So I think, yes, that certainly was a factor. And trying to find a star set of pass rushers along Aiden Hutchinson, that remains a charge for Detroit. That was an issue a season ago. So they've drafted Derek Moore. I know we'll talk more about that here in just a little while, but that was another one of the problems too, is you've got these stars across your defense. Aiden Hutchinson, one of the most prolific pass rushers. Jack Campbell, you look at just tackles last season, and Jack Campbell was second in the NFL on total tackles last season. The injury front, and then the growing on the job for Kelvin Shepard. So if you had to pick one, I think I'd still lean injuries, but I agree with you if you were to suggest that Kelvin Shepard in year one, learning how he's going to call plays, and Kelvin Shepard learning for himself, how am I going to call plays and manage a game, I think, was a factor too.
It's always an interesting thing to see happen when you have such the team builds up and hits that pinnacle, which wasn't quite where you want the pinnacle to be. They want to be the Super Bowl, but with the new coaching staff under Dan Campbell, it's built up exactly the way you would want any team any languishing team to be. When the Cardinals hired Jonathan Gannon, we looked at the Lions as kind of the blueprint of how to progress from going just pathetic team to competitive bad team to mid team to great. And we never got the great. And then once you hit the great, then people start getting poached. So that dynamic of you have your coordinators both get picked away. Ben Johnson goes and has a season with the Bears. Aaron Glenn goes and has a different kind of season with the Jets. but you lose some of that, and you kind of have to build from there. And so to go from that and to still have a winning season. But let's move on to the next part of this show. So coming up next on the Rise of Seared podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk, and we're going to move to the offseason. Coordinator changes, free agency, and the draft. That's coming up next on Rise of Seared. We're back on the Rise of Seared podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the web as we talk to Josh Helmer with Lions Wire about the Detroit Lions and the Cardinals will face in Week 5 at State Farm Stadium. One of the things that they made a change is that they changed offensive coordinators, and they hired the Cardinals scapegoat, being Drew Petzing. It seemed that with what happened last year, nobody was happy with Drew Petzing. That felt like what the Cardinals did over the last half of last year and in this offseason, that they were content with making Kyler Murray and Drew Petzing the scapegoats for this past season. Now, I was a little bit surprised that Jonathan Gannon got fired. I think I believe that decision kind of came as a last minute thing, that they weren't going to fire him, and then like kind of last second they decided to go with that because, after going 3-14 and losing their last 9 games, how could you bring him back? But it felt like the whole time that they were ready to sacrifice Petzing and sacrifice Kyler Murray for the good of moving forward and saying they were the reasons that things were happened. But then Petzing goes and falls upward in a very Lane Kiffin way, like the way he was kind of vilified here, to then go land with a better team with more talent to become the offensive coordinator. Obviously, he has close ties to Brian Johnson. Now they're not on the same staff, but they know each other quite well. And so that meant that Dan Campbell was trusting of Johnson, who then trusts Petzing. What was the view of the addition of Petzing as offensive coordinator, especially after what we saw the Cardinals do in 2025?
Well, it was interesting to follow that search. Mike McDaniel, of course, after he was let go by the Miami Dolphins, Mike McDaniel was a name that was tied to every offensive coordinator vacancy in some capacity, and a couple of head coach vacancies too. You wondered if Mike McDaniel might just get a head coaching job even after he was let go by the Dolphins. But he was tied here to the Lions. And the sentiment that I got, Jess, and this, I don't live in Detroit. I'm not listening to Detroit sports talk radio every single day, but the feedback from my content, our work at Lions Wire, I did get the sense that a lot of Lions fans were caught up in the attraction, the idea of potentially hiring what I think would have been the splash home run type hire in Mike McDaniel. And they interviewed him. And it seemed like maybe there was some momentum there to hire the ex-Dolphins head coach. Obviously, okay, instead he winds up with the Chargers, and the Lions start finding out about Drew Petzing. Drew Petzing gets the gig in Detroit. And really the word out of the Lions' mouths, from Dan Campbell's mouth, was this was just the individual that was the best fit in that building in terms of going to work with one another each and every day. Dan Campbell, I think the personality of Drew Petzing was agreeable with Dan Campbell and with the rest of his staff. That's what has been shared since. And the other positives I think that Detroit is looking at is under Petzing's direction. So you go back to, obviously, Arizona. Trey McBride, what he was able to become, a back-to-back Pro Bowler in 24 and 25. Arizona, as I know you know, Jess, and your audience knows, they had their own litany of offensive injuries. So I think Detroit was kind of looking at some of the items that Petzing had to navigate from an offensive injury front as well, and trying to evaluate, but also the run game, the success of Trey McBride, but the success of the run game. I think that was attractive for Detroit to try to pair with Petzing and with Jahmyr Gibbs and that offensive line that this offseason the Lions are trying to retool. You look at Petzing in his stint in Arizona, the Cardinals ranked second in the NFL in rushing average, 4.92 yards per carry. They were ninth in rushing yards during those 3 years and finished second in yards per carry in both 23 and 24. So those were the items I think Dan Campbell and the Lions were looking at, that, hey, he's a fit in this building. We like the way they ran the football. We like the idea of marrying that with Jahmyr Gibbs and hopefully a retooled, reimagined offensive line to some degree in Detroit. And we like what he did with McBride.
That it does make sense if you ignore last season, because there was progress. There was progress, and granted, the run game was a success largely because he could use Kyler Murray as another threat in the run game. And once Kyler got hurt, and once James Conner got hurt, that run game was non-existent. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes. He does have some old school to him, like his offense sometimes. And in fairness, I will say this, that I believe that some of what his offensive philosophy was clipped by the fact that he had a defensive head coach in Jonathan Gannon, and their philosophy at certain parts of the games matched one of a defensive head coach, where you're like, oh, we've got a lead. Now we're just going to try and run the ball and slow things down. But I mean, the Lions have so many more weapons and a quarterback that has been doing it for a long time. Let's go to the free agency. You had some additions, you had some losses. For you, probably the biggest name to leave in free agency would be David Montgomery, as the Lions kind of move forward more with Jahmyr Gibbs, kind of has emerged as the guy. But who are the losses that are going to be felt the most in 2026?
Well, free agency losses, I think you're looking up front at the DJ Readers of the world. That's been an area that, honestly, it's an unknown right now, Jess. Lopez up front on that interior defensively as well for the Lions. So those would definitely be a couple of names defensively that come to mind for Detroit. And the verdict is still out on that front on how good or how well Detroit can handle those losses on the defensive interior. So certainly those two up front.
And then obviously Roy Lopez came back to Arizona, so we get him back after he was there with the Cardinals, then went to the Lions, and now he's back in Arizona. Had probably his best year last year. The guys added to that, you get DJ Wanham off the edge, an underrated pass rusher who can probably end up doing a little bit better, playing opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. You guys picked up fan favorite from over here, Greg Dortch, who knows Drew Petzing's scheme quite well, and more than anything is a pretty solid guy in the return game. Looking at the additions in free agency, who will end up being who are the biggest moves? Who are the biggest additions that they made?
A couple other free agency losses, just real quick, Jess. Anzalone, linebacker, big loss. Amik Robertson, those a couple of names that the Lions would have loved to have kept if you had every dollar and every piece of the salary cap in the world. But obviously, we know that's not reality. I think the big move was Cade Mays. So he'll come in. Center was a problem for the Lions a season ago. Center was a problem. Offensive line in general took a step back for Detroit. So Cade Mays was the big free agency addition for the Lions. And then I think they kind of nickel and dimed their way a lot of the rest of the way. This offseason, Jess, has not been an offseason for Lions fans that has just been filled with a bunch of splash free agency signings. It's been, how can they position this thing forward? They got a Jack Campbell extension done over the course of this offseason already. And, oh, by the way, that's on the back end here of a number of other extensions to their other stars. So that's where a lot of the money has kind of gone for Detroit is trying to keep this core of stars together. But some of the other notable additions that they made, you mentioned Dortch, that could be an important addition for Detroit because they lost Khalif Raymond, was another free agency loss, and he's an important special teamer, has been for the Lions. Roger McCreary, he'll be a factor. Christian Eisen in the defensive backfield, I think both of those individuals will be big-time difference makers. And we'll see about Wanham as well. They, again, need some pass rushing, need some help on the edge, and hopefully Wanham can provide that for the Lions.
And we have to mention the loss of Terry and Arnold. Messy stuff. How much does that impact things going forward for the defensive backfield? Was he primed for an increased role, or had he not quite been what everyone had hoped he would be?
Well, he hadn't been what everybody had hoped that he would be. That's fair to say. Had played in 24 games, started 22. Remember, he's a former first-round draft pick for the Lions in 2024, and he had not morphed into that, shutdown corner for the Lions, but he played a lot of football for Detroit, and there was a hope that Terry and Arnold could morph into what they envisioned he would be, as a first-round draft pick in 24. So his release, his loss, absolutely will be felt by the Lions. You were hoping still, if you're a Lions fan, I think you're still holding out hope that he can be a star. I mean, he's a former first-round NFL draft pick. Obviously, that's not the way that story is going to unfold in the Motor City. So you turn to somebody like Ennis Rakestraw, who was a second-round draft pick in that same draft, Jess, and he's been hit by the injury bug. His first couple of seasons, he's only been able to play 8 games so far. DJ Reed will be an important factor at corner. They've got a couple of returnees that have played and started games for the Lions, but this is a defensive backfield that not only do you have that going on now with Terry and Arnold, and he hadn't morphed into a star, and now he's no longer on the roster, and corner's kind of viewed as a position of weakness for the Lions. But, oh, by the way, the injuries again, you're dealing with Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, and what's the availability of those two guys at safety going to be like this season and moving forward? So the defensive backfield is a big-time question mark in Detroit.
Taylor Decker is released, and that puts Penei Sewell as potentially able to move over to left tackle. I guess that was the plan. They go into the draft. They select Blake Miller, 17th overall, to Clemson, which leads to the question, and I suppose when the draft happened, I wondered if they're going to get Blake Miller, would they start him at left tackle, where he played all through college? Or would they still move Sewell to the left side, Sewell, who is a fantastic tackle, and then basically have two guys flip-flopping what they've been playing the last few years? What did they do in the offseason? Is Miller going to start? Is it going to be at right tackle? Is it going to be left side? Is Sewell making the switch full-time to the left side?
Yes, Penei Sewell is going to move to the left side for the Lions, and listening to Dan Campbell and general manager Brad Holmes talk over the course of this offseason, Jess, they had hinted at from NFL league meetings and into the buildup of the actual NFL draft the week of and going in that Penei Sewell, it was okay, he could move from the right side to the left side. And as this offseason rolled along, and of course with the Blake Miller selection, it became clear that, yes, they're going to move him from the right side to the left side. They feel comfortable in doing that. They feel, Penei Sewell started at left to begin his career. So they feel comfortable that he'll do great at left tackle. And Blake Miller is discussed, regarded, and I think the Lions thought was a plug-and-play type offensive tackle prospect in this draft. I know the Lions were interested in Caden Proctor, who's just a mass of a human being. I know him, Jess, well, dating back to his recruitment, covering Iowa, recruiting him, and then he was committed to Iowa, then he wound up at Alabama, came back to Iowa, and anyways, I think Caden Proctor will be a wonderful offensive tackle down the line, but he maybe wasn't as plug-and-play as NFL ready, and there's a couple other offensive tackles in this draft that you could probably describe in similar fashion. So Blake Miller, I would imagine, will be the starting right tackle for the Lions, and the thought, again, Jess, is he was the most plug-and-play option in this draft, which makes sense for the Lions because they've got 4 consecutive winning seasons. They went to an NFC championship game, let that NFC championship game in its first Super Bowl appearance, they let that slip away, and then you had the number 1 seed, and of course the Commanders shocked you. So they're in win-now mode, and drafting Blake Miller, I think, matches up with the Lions' timeline.
And Miller was extremely experienced in college, and so especially for a team like that, someone that's not going to have very many growing pains. So you look at that's potential starting offensive line. Sewell and Miller at tackle. You had Tate Ratledge at right guard from last year. Cade Mays jumps in. Is it Christian Mahogany who's likely the left guard? And how does that offensive line feel now in terms of projecting it towards the regular season?
It feels better. And yes, on Mahogany, that's the expectation across the board, moving left to right. They really like Tate Ratledge, too. He obviously, as a rookie, for rookie standards, had a solid rookie season with Detroit. And there was actually some talk about maybe moving him from guard to center. And would that be in play? Obviously, they went a different direction and went ahead and signed an experienced center in free agency. And again, that was their big free agency acquisition, was Cade Mays. So I think the expectation is that it's better. A lot will hinge on, is Blake Miller indeed that plug-and-play tackle? Otherwise, I think, yes, it's definitely better than what they rolled out there last season, that with the Frank Ragnow retirement, surprise summer retirement moving forward, it never came together last year, and hopefully it will for the Lions this season.
The rest of the draft class looks like this. Round 2, defensive end Derek Moore out of Michigan. No third-round pick. Go to round 4, linebacker Jimmy Rolder. 5th-round pick, cornerback Keith Abney, Arizona State guy. I'm an Arizona State guy myself. 5th-round wide receiver Kendrick Law, defensive tackle Skylar Gill-Howard, and DT Tyre West. What is the expectation for Moore? Who should be contributing in year 1, and what is kind of the thought on the rest of those guys?
Well, no question. We've talked about it. The expectation is that Blake Miller is going to be a day 1 starter for the Detroit Lions. So we'll see if indeed that is how this thing plays out. Derek Moore is somebody that you'd have to think can factor in very, very quickly. Jimmy Rolder, because Anzalone left in free agency, he could be in line for snaps early. And now, because of the Terrion Arnold release and that uncertainty at corner and a need for defensive backs to emerge, Abney is somebody that it's not going to be shocking if he's in the mix in some capacity for the Lions early. How much and what that role looks like, okay, we'll see. But I would say any of those first 4 draft picks, and Kendrick Law, like Dortch, was sort of, when he was drafted, regarded as somebody that maybe could help a little bit in the slot, but certainly in the return game. They've lost Kendrick Law for the season, so he's been lost to injury throughout OTAs. But the first 4 draft picks, I think each one of them can be factors, and definitely Blake Miller, he'll be a starter.
Let's look ahead to 2026. Coming on next on the Rise Up Series podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to what expectations are for Detroit in 2026. That's coming on next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. The last part of this show, talking with Lions Wire lead writer Josh Helmer, joining us as we look ahead to the schedule. The Lions' schedule lines up pretty favorably early. They take on the Saints in week 1. They do have a week 2 Thursday night game in Buffalo. Not easy, but then they play the Jets. Then they're on the road against the Panthers and the Cardinals. The Panthers, the NFC South is pretty much across the board, pretty mid. The Cardinals are projected to be bad. The Jets are projected to be bad. And the Saints, maybe mid. they have a really good start in terms of easing into the schedule before their bye week, before they kind of hit 2 division games. So you've got Green Bay, Minnesota, Miami, who's not supposed to be all that great, but then Patriots, Bucks, Bears. So you've got 5 of the next 6 games after the bye that are fairly tough, but you got a kind of an easy, a lighter way to start the season. First off, Detroit Lions expectations for 2026. Obviously, 9-8 was not the expectation last year. Still a winning season. What do people expect out of the Lions, and what's kind of the worst case, best case scenario for them this year?
Now, I'm not part of the SOL group, okay? I don't know if you're familiar with that. Same old Lions is what they say in Motor City. SOL. So I'm not a part of that group, and I'm not a long-suffering Lions fan. So I lean optimistic, Jess, and I'm looking at this maybe from more of an outsider's view than, a long-suffering Lions fans point of view. So I've not been beat down into submission here by, years of failure and heartache and lack of Super Bowl appearances. I really believe that Detroit is primed to be one of the NFL's primary bounce-back candidates. I would pick Detroit today to win the NFC North. I know a lot of folks like Caleb Williams, and understandably so. It's a tough division. Kyler Murray well, and I think the fit in Minnesota is a good fit for Kyler Murray to potentially have a resurgence in his career with those weapons there. The Green Bay Packers with Jordan Love. It's a tough division, the NFC North is, but I still think the Lions are good, man. And I think that they had a rash of injuries defensively last season. I don't think they were as far away from a 12-win team as maybe 9-8 would lead some fans to believe. So I'm optimistic going into this season for the Lions. I think they're going to win the NFC North. I think a lot of that will be in relation to how explosive this offense is, the fact that they have shored up the offensive line a little bit with Blake Miller, with Cade Mays, protecting Jared Goff better, hopefully blocking better for Jahmyr Gibbs, and then letting, of course, those wide receivers, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and Jamison Williams, all of those weapons. Laporta, okay, his health, that's a question too, but I'm optimistic, man, going into this season for the Lions that they will be back among the top NFC contenders. But that's not necessarily an opinion that's shared by all in Detroit. I know that and there's reasons to be on the more pessimistic end of that equation, Jess. The injury issues that will hang over this football team until those questions get answered with Brian Branch, with Kirby Joseph, with Sam Laporta, and there's other names that you could mention there. But again, I lean optimistic. I think that they're going to be a playoff team. I think that they're going to be a legitimate NFC and Super Bowl contender. But again, there's reasons, and probably primarily defensively and on the injury front, why others would maybe not feel that way.
Well, playing in the NFC West. So I know that the NFC West, especially with the high end, because you got the Rams, Seahawks, and 49ers, who are all really, really good. And then you got the Cardinals. The Cardinals are a mess. But from top to bottom, I don't know if there's a better division than the NFC North, because you have 4 teams who all could be solid playoff. Like Green Bay's consistently been good on both sides of the ball. Chicago last year, if they build on that, now can they follow that up with a second consecutive year like that? Because you often get the regression year after that. The Lions, who were ascending until last year, and then the Vikings, they peaked with Darnold. Last year was not as what they had hoped, and then they bring in Kyler this year to see what happens. I think from top to bottom, I think that's the most competitive division. Well, competitive good from top to bottom, as opposed to like the NFC South, which is a competitive mid. The NFC North is competitive good from top to bottom, as opposed to like the NFC West, where you've got 3 great teams and then a doormat in the Cardinals. So there's no doormats in the NFC North. Like at worst, like a bad season for any of those teams is a mid-season, or even like we're looking like last year. Detroit finished 9-8, and that was a bad year for them.
And just to very succinctly answer your question, best case scenario, as I told you, I think win the NFC North, legitimate contender in the NFC, and a potential Super Bowl participant. Worst case scenario, I think, is right kind of where they finished last year. I just don't see them as a 7-10 type football team.
Oh, no. Unless it was, absolute disaster. Like you're starting Teddy Bridgewater most of the year. That'll
injuries, whatever it may be.
That'll do that. Now, obviously, you guys look at it, Lions fans will look at that game in Week 5 as a definite should win, even though they're on the road in Arizona. Arizona's but would you agree that that's not considered a toss-up game? It's not considered a trap game. It's considered a, hey, let us write this win in pen.
Yeah, it needs to be. If Detroit is going to accomplish what they hope to accomplish, unfortunately for Cardinals fans right now, that's one of those games that they're going to look at and say, yeah, we need to win that one.
Well, that's one of those games you look at. It's like if the Lions are who they think they are, you can't lose to the Cardinals, because if you lose to the Cardinals, unless the Cardinals, I can't even be like, well, maybe the Cardinals are better than advertised. 5 wins
for Cardinals fans. I'll say this, and I'm sure they'll think it that week is there is the, hey, can we get back at Petzing a little bit for this torture he put us through? So if there's anything, I mean, maybe there's something there, and this in the NFL, bad teams.
Rallis and Petzing, defensive coordinator Nick Rallis is back, does know Petzing well, but Petzing also knows Nick Rallis well, and so they will know their strengths and weaknesses.
And look, the unthinkable happens in the NFL because it's the National Football League. Bad teams beat really good teams. Those things happen. Would I pick it? No, I'd like the Lions today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've got a Lions team that, best case scenario, they're Super Bowl contenders. Worst case scenario, they're looking at a better than a good comparatively good Lions season historically is their worst case scenario.
And just to play with it a little bit, if the doomsday scenario happens, that would be interesting to see what happens in Detroit, because it's a little bit of uncharted waters for them, being in this position where they're thought to be a contender, and all of a sudden you have multiple disappointing seasons back to back. What does that mean for Dan Campbell, for Brad Holmes? I don't even know. But let's not even travel that road.
No. But we'll be looking forward to that game in Week 5. That wraps up this edition of the Rise Up Seared podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the web. Again, that's Josh Helmer. You can find his work over at the Lions Wire and apparently multiple sites over your Iowa Hawkeyes coverage as well for the college ranks, correct?
HawkeyesWire.com, and check out my work over there and the team's work at Lions Wire, of course. And you can follow us on social media at the Lions Wire on Twitter. Jess, man, I appreciate the invite. You guys do a great job at Cards Wire, man, and can't wait to enjoy this NFL season together, and I'm sure we'll be chatting in Week 5.
Thank you, man. That'll wrap up this edition of the show. We've got more in the next few weeks. We've got more opponent previews. We've got more shows with me and normal co-host Seth Cox as we look ahead to training camp. Thanks for listening, and as always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.